welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me, I'm your host, 6 years and nearly 400 episodes taped where we have interviewed every major thought leader in the world, whether they were a CEO from the C-suite, a business titan, an entrepreneur, solopreneur, intrapreneur, perhaps some of them were content creators, maybe they were authors, celebrities, people perhaps that had done remarkable things with their careers, or they had recovered or survived sometimes unspeakable traumas and tragedies and summoned the courage to both live and thrive and share their stories with you. This has become the world's largest weekly leadership podcast, all dedicated to making you a better leader. Franklin Covey, of course, is a sponsor, and they are known as the most trusted leadership firm in the world. You may know our founder and author Stephen R. Covey wrote this seminal book, amongst many, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This book has sold more than 50 million copies worldwide, and this podcast is dedicated to also helping you be more effective at whatever role matters most to you. Now, what most of you have in common is everybody here is trying to be a better leader, however you define leader, and also manage your career while still having a fulfilling life that is more than just your career. Today, we have two remarkable authors. They've co-authored a new book titled Career Forward, Strategies from Women Who've Made It. And although the book is aimed primarily at females and their careers, I thoroughly enjoyed the book, took away so many great insights. So I would argue, regardless of your gender, whether you are a mentor, a sponsor, a champion, whether you're early on the front end of your career, you're entering your crescendo, regardless, I think you'll find great leadership and career insights in this book. The co-authors are Grace Puma, who is the former COO of PepsiCo, and Christiana Smith-Shee, who's the former president of Consumer Direct for Nike. They're joining us today as co-authors from different locations. Ladies, welcome. Grace, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Scott.
And Christiana, welcome as well to you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Ladies, you are in different locations. Grace, I think you are in Tampa, Florida, and Christiana, you're in the Northwest as well. Delighted that you joined us today to talk about your new release, Career Forward. First, Grace, would you spend some time, maybe a minute or so, and reorient yourself to all of our listeners and viewers, talk about your career at PepsiCo. Maybe you could share why you had enough passion on this topic to write this book, and then we'll have Christiana follow you with the same question.
Sure. So my last role was with PepsiCo as the chief operating officer and basically had responsibility for all the global operations within a matrix organization. And the reason we wrote this book was really around the passion of being able to reflect on the learnings and the ability to transfer those learnings to other people as we had culminated that corporate aspect of our career journey. So it's a pretty good time to reflect and give back.
Grace, take it a little bit further. How many years did you spend with the Pepsi organization?
Sure. So I spent about 12 years with PepsiCo. I originally came in as their chief procurement officer, and then my role was expanded into supply chain and ultimately to the executive vice president, chief operating officer, reporting into our CEO. So it was really a very progressive journey, and I was very grateful for that.
And Grace, maybe rewind a little bit more, because you have an interesting journey from, of course, your parents and academically as well. Maybe you were born where, and then what happened next?
Sure. So I was actually born in Des Plaines, Illinois, but my sisters were born in Cuba. My parents came, both of them, from Cuba, and had the story of starting over in the United States and building a life. So from there, I really learned a lot as a child about resiliency and about gratitude as you cultivate your journey.
I really thoroughly enjoyed the introduction where you introduced your parents to us and talked about their no complaints and their sort of forward-looking mindset and took complete control for their circumstance and rebuilt a life for themselves here in the U.S. Even though it was not a very long segment, it made me more grateful for all the opportunities I've been given as an American. So I appreciated you sharing that. Christiana, maybe share as well. You were born where and what happened next?
I was born in Chicago, middle child of 5. I always say there is nothing about my early years that you would pinpoint and say, she's going to be president of a major consumer brand. But I guess I kind of grew up always with the sense that I wanted a bigger life. I wanted to know what was out there. I wanted to see things. So I I grew up most of the time in California after we moved there when I was a kid. And I went away to college, and I went from college all the way across the country to New York City. And I was in management consulting for a long time, and then I left and went to Nike. So there's been a couple of major times where I made changes in my career that were risky, and it was because I wanted to see what else I could do.
Grace, I think people are especially interested. I know I am riveted listening to people's journeys. How did they get from here to there and what the pivots were? I also think people are always fascinated about collaborations, especially co-authorships. How did you and your co-author, Christiana, meet? How did you decide to co-author this book? And why was this the particular topic you chose to write about?
Yeah, it was a really a blessing. We were both on a board at the same time. We joined at the same time. And, as you usually do, you look around the room, and we immediately connected. So from that relationship, one day we went out after a board meeting and started to connect on our journeys and our lives. And we realized that we both had a common passion for giving back, but we also had millennial children, if you can call them that. Our children were at that mid stage of their career, and we found it important to share our learnings and strategies on how they can maneuver their journey. One of the other things that resonated with us in those conversations was the fact that we both got to senior levels in very different paths. And this is really important because there was a lot of value in co-authoring. We have a lot of shared experiences. We have a lot of different experiences, but there were some common truths and strategies that we both applied. And so that opened up the door to write a book that allowed people to figure out how to cultivate their journeys and their paths by using some of the things that we were able to learn.
Christiana, your book is titled Career Forward, but it's more than just a title. You describe it as a mindset, if I'm not mistaken, in the book, of having a career forward mindset. Christiana, would you riff on that for a moment? What is a career forward mindset? And maybe also start with, what's the opposite? Some people don't have a career forward mindset. They may not understand what that means. Riff on that and teach us what it looks like not to have one, and what does it look like, sound like, feel like to have a career forward mindset?
Sure. So career forward mindset is a lot about looking down the road and getting in the driver's seat of your career and steering your career towards someplace you want to end up. We use the driving metaphor a lot in the book, and this is one of the most perfect examples of it. We always like to say, if you're not in the driver's seat of your career, someone else is, right? And the opposite of a career forward mindset is going from job to job, maybe chasing the next title, maybe chasing the next salary bump, maybe stagnating in the job that you're in and missing opportunities. And finding that, when you lift your head up mid-career, you're not sure that you're going any place that's exciting to you, and you're not sure you're going to get someplace that's exciting to you. So career forward mindset has a couple of key elements to it. And one is recognizing your job is not your career. And other elements of it are saying you've got to think about and be strategic about setting a direction for your career. We call it Cardinal Direction. And about setting yourself plans and strategies for what you're going to do to build your skills, to increase your professional network, to develop the roadmap that you need to get to your desired goal.
Grace, I want to be careful not to stereotype women versus men, but there are a lot of books in the marketplace aimed at a woman's rise to the CEO and how women can have sponsors and how important it is for women to grow their careers. Grace, have you found in either your empirical or anecdotal research in your own experience, do women tend to give up their careers to other people in the organizations more than men? Is it a ubiquitous problem? And regardless of the answer, why do you think people, I'm guessing accidentally, unconsciously, give up power of their career to someone else, some organization, some team, some leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting because the career forward mindset is rooted in intentionality and ownership. So to answer your question, I think sometimes it's easier for people to think their careers are in the hands of the company or in their boss or whatever is happening organizationally. And what we offer in this book is, it's really about owning and being intentional and strategically planning your career. So the answer of why men and women might do that is it's probably an easier thing to say, hey, it's in the hands of somebody else versus I'm responsible and I'm in the driver's seat. I have the benefit of owning my career, owning my choices, ensuring that I'm developing, and therefore comes the advancement. And once you have yourself in the driver's seat, it's a lot harder to now make those decisions and make sure that the accountability lands with you.
So Grace,
Well,
I'm going to
Scott, if I could,
Yes, please, Christina.
if I could add to that, we recognize that it's hard to generalize across an entire gender, right? And say, women this, women that. Grace and I are very different people, so we know really, day to day, just the range of, different orientations and expectations and experience that women will have in their careers. However, we did a lot of research and we looked at a lot of data, and there are patterns that you can see that emerge around women and their typical career experiences. And what we wanted to do was put together our learning and our lessons for how to be prepared for those and how to get in front of them, as Grace said, with intention. So for instance, the fact that there's often a salary gap, the fact that women are not always, very often, not paid the same as male counterparts, but less comfortable asking for increased compensation. The fact that there's a broken rung partway through a woman's career, typically where families are formed, where you see a huge drop off of women from careers, and so on and so on. So as we saw the data and those patterns, we wanted to address it in that way, even though we recognize there's a range of experiences everyone is going to have around that.
Christiana, you mentioned this idea of cardinal direction. Will you take a few minutes and talk more about that? And then I'm going to come over to Grace and talk about the concept of guardrails, which I think is an interesting idea in all of our careers. Talk about, Christiana, cardinal direction in our career.
So as I said, cardinal direction is the goal of your career. But we chose that phrase instead of something that you might have heard more often, like true north, on purpose. Because if you think about true north and sailors, navigating in the seas, they navigate to the true north or to the North Star because it doesn't move. It's fixed. Cardinal direction and the way it functions in terms of your career planning is more flexible. It is more evolutionary. It is this idea that you are pulling up regularly and thinking about where you want to go and what you want to do with your career, but you're also leaving the space and the allowance for things to change, because that's real life. Your responsibilities change, your life goals change. You learn a lot as you work about what you want to do and who you want to do it with. And you can continue to firm up that cardinal direction. But it stays there as a goal, the same way that you put the destination into your GPS in your car. And over time, as we've all seen, the route the GPS tells you to take may change based on road conditions, but you're still aiming to the same goal.
Ladies, your book isn't a memoir per se, but in many ways you've written it as your own professional journeys that make it really relatable for other readers, male or female, to see themselves in your journey. You're actually quite vulnerable about some of the jobs you applied for, internships, whatever it was, and why you did or didn't land them. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the writing style of your book. I think readers and listeners to your book on audio will enjoy the vulnerability you shared in your setbacks as well as your goals. Nicely done on the way in which you integrated both of your voices and a complementary style. Anyone can find themselves in some portion of your journey. That isn't always easy to do as an author. Having said that, Grace, we hear a lot about boundaries. It's a very popular term now in our life, and the boundaries we set for ourselves, the boundaries we set for others. You use a term in the book about setting guardrails, even early on. Talk about that and maybe give some specific guardrails, Grace, that you set in your own career and still made it to the top. And because here's the reason why I give a preamble. I think sometimes boundaries can have a negative connotation. This person has so many boundaries and so many restrictions and what they will and what they won't do and when they will and won't take a call or an email. But you kind of frame that differently. Talk about boundaries and then maybe expand on what are some of the ones that you set that didn't just hold you back, propelled you.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think you really have to be thoughtful and intentional in understanding what your guardrails or boundaries are. And I think they evolve over time too, as your life changes and as you change as a person. So, for me, well, let me first start with why are they helpful? They're helpful because then they become kind of it allows you to make really clear decisions on what type of jobs to take, what type of companies to join. You're very clear about it because you understand the parameters that are important to you and what will make you successful in those environments. So you select and you choose in a way that's informed. And so that's why it is important. For me, certainly, boundaries and guardrails, some of them that I set was taking care of my health. And again, sometimes you learn this. Okay, early in my career, I probably, had twists and turns. And I learned that be able to go a 40-year career or whatever it ends up being, you really need to take care of your health and you need to prioritize it. And that means that you're making your doctor appointments, that you're working out, that you're eating well. And when you fall off that track, you need to be conscious that it's a guardrail for you and it's a boundary for you, and you need to put yourself back on it. So that's an example. And it's so important because it's just one example. The other example is finding time for your family connections. And those aren't always known or visible in your workplace. So I call this, moments that count and creating rituals. So one of my boundaries was I made time for that. And one might look at my career and say, when, you worked an ungodly amount of hours, you were on, planes everywhere all over the United States, but I did. And I made those rituals, things that kind of fed my soul and kept me connected to my family. So as an example, when my son was very young and I was a single mom, and I used to get to the office at 6:30 in the morning. I often did that through my career. I ended up taking some mornings where I would take him out for pancakes on a weekday, which was out of the norm. And then I would drop him at school that day. And it just made him realize that he was important and it was an unusual connection for something very simple. So whatever your rituals are, those get built in, and they get built in a way that kind of keeps your soul in check and your family connection strong.
Grace, I'm going to expand on that because, I think it's likely a lot of readers could think a book from two C-level executives might be a little ethereal or aspirational. But one of the things I love about your book is this checklist on your guardrails. You list out 15, 20 things that people need to think about intentionally. Is this a non-negotiable? Is it a preferred? Is it not crucial now? I love that grid you have around thinking about, leadership opportunities. The industry, title, benefits, company size, DEI efforts, ESG, quality of company leadership, and having people think more intentionally and deliberately. My experience as a person who's also wrote a book with career guidance is I think too many people are accidental. They don't take the deliberate time to think through these crucial things, and they fall into a trap and realize, oh my goodness, I had no idea the leadership of this company is misaligned with my ethics and my brand. And they didn't do the due diligence. Take that one step further. Grace, talk about something you did in your own career around self-care. You talked about the pancake time with your son. I'm going to guess, again, broad generalization, self-care is a topic we all know we need to do, and most of us neglect it, especially those of us who have high-charging careers. Do you think it's more difficult for women to prioritize self-care in their careers? Or just generally, why is it so difficult for us to prioritize self-care? No one at their deathbed wished they'd spent more time at the office, the famous quote. Talk about self-care and are there some things you did that might give permission to listeners and readers to say, well, if Grace can do it, darn it, so can I.
Yeah, I think first of all, the first question, why is it harder for women? I think I would speak to my experience was because majority of the caregiving was on our shoulders, okay? And, maybe we raised our hand and assumed that role, and maybe it was just given to us. But the bottom line is you're the center of the family unit in many cases. So you're taking care of your parents, you're taking care of your kids, you're taking care of things at home. And by doing all that, something has to give. So for me, and I was a single parent when my kids were little for a number of years, one of the things I did was get very comfortable with getting support where I needed it. I didn't try to bake all the cookies for the bake sale. I bought them. I made sure I had support group around me that would help me balance things. So my time was spent focused on the important things, and not necessarily all the things that needed to get done. So it's very much about finding solutions, and I did that actively throughout my career. I often lived way below my means to make sure that I had a nest egg and that I could invest in things like that, like quality childcare, and other things that helped me have quality time when I was home.
Christiana, I think a lot of people confuse mentorship and sponsorship together. I believe they're very different concepts. Will you just riff on what is sponsorship? Why is it so important? You write about mentorship in the book pretty extensively, but why is sponsorship so important? And how does someone get a sponsor? What are the behaviors, the reputation, the awkward process of getting a sponsor? And I'm guessing sponsorship is not just as important for women and men. It's probably more necessary for women than men. I could be wrong. Take that wherever you'd like it to go.
Yeah. So we wanted to draw that distinction between mentorship and sponsorship because both Grace and I, particularly at this stage in our lives, get asked to be mentors a lot. And sometimes it's literally someone messaging us on LinkedIn who we don't even know, asking if we would be their mentor. And it's really clear that with no personal connection and no history with a particular person, it's hard to give them career advice that's more than generic, right? That is actually useful and tailored to their situation. But we also know that you need more than advice. Mentors are great for that, and they can also provide just support and a listening ear and a lot of important things. But you need people in your career who will go one step further and put skin in the game. And that's what we think sponsorship is. Sponsors are the people who will mention your name when you're not in the room. Sponsors are people who will tell others to take a chance and put you in the leadership role in that particular project. Sponsors are the ones who will extend their network to you and connect you to someone that they know, that they think has an interesting opportunity that you ought to understand. That's sponsorship. So how do you get a sponsorship? Well, no surprise, that evolves a lot more organically and a lot more personally than mentorship does. So the best sponsors are people who have actually worked with you, who have seen you, who know you, who understand the context of your environment, your career, your life. And there is a certain chemistry to it that you can't force, that has to naturally develop. What you can do, though, as an individual who is looking for sponsorship, is nurture those relationships, because it doesn't just bloom from, I just met you, we did something together for a week at this company, and now I'm expecting you to stick your neck out for me. It's over time. I call you and ask if we can have a cup of coffee. Over time, I ask for your advice on something. Over time, if you need some kind of help or support that I'm in a position to provide, I do that, because you're building a mutual support circle. That's how you create and nurture a sponsor relationship. And both Grace and I have had relationships like that have transcended the companies we worked for, that have lasted across multiple stages of our career, that have literally been, a decade or longer. That's what we're talking about.
Grace, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple things on that. One is, especially when it comes to sponsorships or sponsors, it's really important to realize that they're typically rooted in your performance. They're going to sponsor you because you are performing very well, because you have potential to continue to grow in the organization. So sponsors are sponsoring you with a business purpose in mind, good for the company, good for you. And the second point I would make is, it's important to keep an eye on it. I mean, I had this experience where I had a couple of very strong sponsors, and they all left the company at the same time. And I realized that the learning there was to continue to cultivate tiers of sponsors, if you would, because it does, yes, it's rooted in your performance, but it is important because it's a very dynamic work environment. So that's how you have to think about the sponsor role.
Sounds like the key to sponsorship is broad and wide, but really behave yourself into a reputation of delivering results so that
well said.
Grace or Christiana are willing to put their neck on the line and sponsor you as well. I mean, it's a pretty simple concept that takes a lot of work. You can't manipulate your way into sponsorship. Christiana, I want you to expand on the concept of benevolent stagnation, because I think everybody experiences it, and I'll bet no one knows it. More of an unconscious than conscious decision. Talk about what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like to be in that zone, and how does someone know it and move out of it?
Yeah, benevolent stagnation is where you have been in a particular role, in a particular company, or with a particular employer or particular team for a while. And you've gotten very comfortable at delivering exactly what needs to be delivered in that role. And it's well known across your organization or your team that you will deliver it. But what happens over time, just like a rocket has to turn on its jets periodically to stay in orbit, if you don't actually keep growing in a particular role or situation, what you're going to find is there's a strong gravitational pull down. And what we've seen is people who think they are very comfortable in a given role or in a given company are the ones who are the most vulnerable and the most affected when things change, right? Company gets bought, company gets sold, boss changes, skills and expectations for that role go up. We're all watching that with things like AI and other tech trends, and you didn't keep up with it, right? And suddenly your stagnation has actually turned into something that's a lot more challenging, which is that you are actually now behind and trying to catch up. And it's hard to see that because you're still delivering what needs to be done in the current role that you're in. And by the way, your team or your boss is relying on it, is thanking you for it. You're getting lots of praise, but ask yourself, am I getting opportunities? Am I showing up in meetings where the rising stars in the company show up? And is my name being talked about in rooms where important decisions are getting made? We want you to use the tools that we have in Career Forward to actually keep your head up above the water, keep that up periscope so that you know how to answer those questions on a regular basis and you are not the one who's caught by surprise.
I think it's a sleeper concept in your book that is a gift to the reader. Whitney Johnson wrote several books, including a book titled Disrupt Yourself. And in this book, Whitney talks about how, somewhere between 18 and 36 months, most of us on average master the role that we're in. And we start to become complacent, a little bit unconsciously. And long before we notice it, it's not an indictment on our work ethic, but it's just a fact that once you've kind of mastered a role, you're not phoning it in, but you are a little complacent. And the horror is that your colleagues around you notice it and see it before you do. And sometimes they make assessments or judgments about your work ethic, your career goals, your drive. And I think it's a very important concept you write about in the book. So many of those nuggets throughout. Grace, no one's career is a straight line trajectory. No doubt we've all had setbacks. Would you show some vulnerability? What's a mistake you made in your career? Did you trust someone? Did you not go through the guardrail checklist? What's a lesson you might share in a vulnerable moment? I'm going to ask you, Christiana, as well. That's a great lesson you might share to everyone listening today, regardless of gender.
Yeah, so I think it's it's like your strength sometimes can be something that plays out differently. So for example, I would say my capacity, especially early in my career, I have tremendous capacity and I can digest information very quickly. So one of the things I had to really learn is to make sure people were keeping up with me. And so as you lead, you have to keep pace of other people's learning curves. And so sometimes it required taking a step back and going through more time with certain individuals and making sure that there's good transfer of knowledge, and also just your sheer capacity. Your work ethic might be, I'm on full throttle in my career and I have to appreciate kind of dialing that back at certain times. So I would say it's more about that, the awareness of that and the dial it up, dial it down capability that I had to apply in certain situations.
No doubt our strengths, when overplayed, can absolutely become our weaknesses. You can see that as evidenced by my human resource file. Grace, similar flip side of that, just saying. It's why it's an expandable folder. They had to get a couple more folders for me. Grace, was there a particular pivot point or inflection point in your career that maybe was replicable for other people, that you might say, hey, here's really when my career took off because I made these decisions or aligned with this sponsor or had some self-awareness, perhaps something not unique to your own skills, but that is inherent in everybody's opportunity. They just haven't lit that match yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think it would be the biggest positions you have, but it actually wasn't for me. For me, it was at a time I took a very unorthodox move and went to an airline. And I was working for a food company that was a very stable food company. But I decided to go work for an airline for 3 years intentionally because it was going to give me this tremendous transformational experience. And I didn't go there to work for an airline. I went there to work for the CEO that was bringing in a number of senior leaders of different disciplines. And it taught me incredible capability and skills in terms of managing in what ended up being the largest financial crisis, transforming the capability of the airline with the team, but the camaraderie. I mean, working in a part of a leadership team that had a mission to make really important and strategic decisions that turned around the performance and ultimately led to a very successful merger was just invaluable. I was at the table at a point where way beyond my level in the organization and the ability to be able to weigh in on decisions and make contributions and learn from others. So that was a pivotal point. And I took that as the launching pad to my next big job in a $100 billion company.
Grace, what's the biggest lesson you learned from Indra Nooyi at PepsiCo?
Answer your emails. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, that's good.
In 2 hours. No, Indra I had a lot of opportunity to work with Indra, and I'm so blessed. I mean, I had direct exposure with her during her time there, and she's incredibly strategic. She asks tough questions. You always learn to make sure you've done your homework. And she appreciated the voice in the room, the opinions, and the intellectual thought. So she had an insatiable work ethic, which I shared with her. So there was a lot to learn from Indra, and I was grateful for my time there.
Including answer your emails within 2 hours. Okay, Christine, I'm asking the same question. Show some vulnerability as well. Is there something that was a setback, a bad career decision that you might share with us that would warrant people's own introspection?
I can think of several, but we actually call them skids in the book, and
Yes.
we talk about steering into the skid because everybody's career is going to have moments where you feel like you're losing traction or things are spinning out of control. I had a pretty bumpy transition from being an individual contributor when I was in management consulting to being a manager. So it wasn't a career change. It was more I was committing to making that transition at McKinsey & Company where I was. And it turned out it was the first time in my career that I wasn't naturally good at something. And so my approach as a manager was to stay in a very granular way on top of everybody on my team and asking them where are they at and what are they doing and looking over their shoulder. And the best thing that happened early on was two of the guys on my team who were only a year junior to me gave me feedback. It was unsolicited, so I appreciate the courage that took them to pull me aside and said, we don't actually need you to stay on top of, every cell in our Excel model. We need you to give us overall guidance. We need you to be out there talking to the client. We need you to do. And they basically told me where I was going off track as a manager. And it was a real pause for me because I was a high performer and I was used to everything kind of coming naturally. And it taught me that I needed to actually study how to be a better manager. And luckily I was working in a firm that had lots of training programs and I was able to take advantage of that. But it was the first time that I consciously focused on, I have a gap. My gap is my gap to my goal. And I need to do the following things to fill that gap in.
Getting feedback on your blind spots is one of the best gifts you can get from leaders and from colleagues. Expand. What was your inflection point? Positively.
What was my inflection point for that particular moment in my career? I think my inflection point.
Yeah, in your career overall, was there like a really good decision you made or a positive opportunity that really took your career to new heights?
Oh, for sure. So I every time at the heart of the inflection points I've had in my career has been commitment to take a risk.
Yeah.
And one of the most recent ones that I had was to leave a 24-year career in management consulting where I was the senior partner, top of the tier, to go to Nike and to actually go work for a company that had been a client of mine for 10 years. And I had not worked in corporate America, so to speak, versus professional services for 24 years. I had been an observer. I'd been an advisor and a counselor to corporate America. I'd been a problem solver, but I hadn't actually worked in that environment. Not to mention, I left everybody I knew in California and moved up to Portland, Oregon. So from a family point of view, a friend's point of view, I mean, it was like rip the Band-Aid off. But I did that because I was committed to the fact that I was, in fact, at risk of benevolent stagnation.
Yeah.
And I was getting very comfortable doing a lot of the same things a lot of the time as a 10-year senior partner. And I still felt like I had a lot of growth left that I wanted to accomplish as a leader. And that one of the best ways to do that was to actually go into an operating environment with the P&L responsibility, with the clock ticking, with tens of thousands of employees, and see if I knew what I was talking about when I was advising CEOs for all those years.
Did Phil Knight have the same requirement on 2-hour email turnaround?
Phil does not really use email.
I figured that would be your response.
It's very different. I challenge anyone to tell me what Phil Knight's email address is. But remember, when I went to Nike, he was chair and had already put Mark Parker in as the CEO. And I will tell you, Nike is very much a performance-driven culture, similar to what Grace talked about at PepsiCo, and very much a can we get it done now culture. And I think we're all going to find that high-performing companies have some of those same characteristics.
Grace Puma, former COO of PepsiCo, Christiana Smith-Shee, former president, Consumer Direct for the Nike organization. Your book is Career Forward, Strategies from Women Who've Made It. What a gift to readers and audio listeners as well. I've thought a lot about my own career mindset and the benevolent stagnation that all of us experience. I think your book is going to do extremely well. Thanks for your time today. Grace, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for your time.
Christiana, thank you as well for your time. Best of luck to both of you.
Thank you, Scott.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.